as we're thinking about planting spring flowering bulbs, it's a good idea to couple those with other plants. A lot of us already plant either pansies or violas over the top of where we planted our bulbs so that we've got blooms now, and also that there's an understory of bloom as our bulbs are blooming in the spring. Also, it's a good idea to interplant bulbs amongst a ground cover, such as ajuga or English ivy, so you get flowers peeking up through a nice green carpet. But there are some other plant combinations that work very well, not because they're present at both at the same time, but because as one is fading, the other one is starting to grow. An example of this would be down here we've got our daylilies, and as you look at the foliage, it really is very similar to the foliage of a daffodil. So if we interplanted daffodils amongst our daylilies, in the spring the daffodils would come up and bloom, and then the foliage would start to die. Now we don't want to cut that foliage off because we want the food to go back down into the bulb. So if we've got them interplanted amongst daylilies, as that daffodil foliage is dying, the daylily foliage is coming up and masking it. Another combination would be something like yarrow, one of our summer blooming perennials. We could plant daffodils or hyacinths behind this, and we'd get a nice bloom in the spring, and then as our yarrow foliage started to come up, our tulip foliage would be hidden as it died. Now the thing to think about when you're doing these combinations is to place those bulbs towards the back of your perennials, because in the spring you'll see the bulbs because the perennials aren't there, and then as they start to die, you'll see that perennial foliage come up and mask it. Well, another thing that is a little confusing as you start to plant bulbs is how many bulbs do I need for a certain area? And we have a chart that can help you with that today. First, tulips, you need about 8 to 10 for a square foot. For hyacinths, you need about 5 per square foot, as do you with daffodils. For the crocus and smaller bulbs, get about 10 to 15 per square foot. And for Allegan giganteum, you only need 1 per square foot. For alliums the size of Purple Sensation, 5 per square foot will do, and for the other smaller alliums, 10 to 15 per square foot. Well, in addition to knowing how many bulbs to plant in a given area, we also need to know how deep to plant them. And a general rule of thumb is to plant bulbs from 2 to 3 times their height. And we're planting some species crocus here in our garden railway, so I've got the hole about 3 inches deep. Now once you've got your hole dug, then you need to dig about 2 inches deeper and get that soil down there worked up, because what you're going to do then is add some bone meal or bulb booster, some kind of bulb fertilizer in that hole. And with bone meal, you want to add anywhere from 1/2 to 2 teaspoons per bulb, depending on the size of the bulb. And in this hole, I'm going to be adding about 1/2 teaspoon per bulb because these bulbs are very small in this hole. Now I've got my bone meal in here, and then what I'm going to do is actually work that into the soil, because you want your fertilizer down below the bulbs when you plant them, because that's where the roots are going to be. So I've got that worked in. I'm just going to spread a little bit more soil over the top just so that we've got the right planting level. Another problem people face when they plant bulbs is many times they have problems with critters coming back and eating their bulbs. Usually daffodils don't have this problem, but the other bulbs can be kind of a nuisance. What you can do is actually make a protective cage for your bulbs. It's kind of like a shark cage, except it's a bulb cage to keep your bulbs safe. And it's just some chicken wire. If you had a larger area, you could get a larger piece of chicken wire. I'm actually going to plant bulbs in small clumps, so I didn't get a very big piece. So I just put this in the hole, and then I'll actually put a little bit more soil on top of that just so that my bulbs are at the right level. I don't really want to plant that pecan. And then I'll go ahead and put my crocus in here. Now, many times people will plant their bulbs in a straight row, or every bulb is exactly spaced from the other. But if you kind of use your total area and randomly space your bulbs in that area, you actually get a more natural type setting. So I'm kind of using my entire area, but I'm not necessarily putting all of my bulbs exactly 3 inches apart here. I've got them kind of spaced out here together. Now, all I need to do after I've got those is put a little bit more soil on top. And be careful as you do that so that you don't knock your bulbs over. And then I'm actually going to close my cage up over the top of those. And here you'll see. And I've basically got my bulbs positioned so they're at the proper height. And you can kind of work with this as you're working with your cage. But make sure you plant your bulbs at the right height. And also make sure that you've got your cage buried so that you don't end up catching that with some other type of equipment. I'm also going to close the ends of my bulb cage here. And this can serve as an effective barrier to keep squirrels from digging your bulbs out, or keep gophers or other animals from eating your bulbs. And then what I'll do is just cover that, and those bulbs can grow right out the bottom and right out the top of that cage, and that should keep them safe. Now, another way to keep critters from eating your bulbs is to be sure to clean up any bulb debris that you might have. Some of the wrappers that may have come off the bulbs, those actually have a scent, and that can draw the animals to your bulbs. So kind of clean up your planting area so that you don't leave that behind and leave scent cues to those animals so that they can find your bulbs. And once you've done that, you're well on your way to a really great spring blooming planting.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.